Today we are discussing idolatry and the miraculous, which is quite fitting considering the fact that we managed to film at the golden hour. Look at us all professional and shit. Fuck yeah. We begin with a quote by Ansari of Herix. Quote, "Can you walk on water? You have done no better than a straw. Can you fly in the air? You have done no better than a blue bottle. Conquer your heart, and then you may become somebody." I quote Aldous Huxley, quote, "The abnormal bodily states, which the immediate awareness of the divine ground is often accompanied, are not, of course, essential parts of that experience. Many mystics, indeed, deplored such things as being signs, not of grace, but of the body's weakness. To levitate, to go into trance, to lose the use of one's senses. This is to receive the effects of God in His holy communications in a very animal and carnal way." Quote, "1 ounce of sanctifying grace is worth more than 100 weight of those graces which theologians call gratuitous, among which is the gift of miracles. It is possible to receive such gifts and yet to be in mortal sin, nor are they necessary to salvation." Jean-Pierre Chemist. The Sufis regard miracles as veils intervening between the soul and God. The masters of Hindu spirituality urge their disciples to pay no attention to the siddhis or psychic powers which may come to them unsought, as a byproduct of one-pointed contemplation. The cultivation of these powers, they warn, distracts the soul from reality and sets up insurmountable obstacles in the way of enlightenment and deliverance. A similar attitude is taken by the best Buddhist teachers, and in one of the Pali scriptures, there is an anecdote recording the Buddha's own characteristically dry comment on a prodigious feat of levitation performed by one of his disciples. "This," he said, "will not conduce to the conversion of the unconverted, nor to the advantage of the converted." Then he went back to talking about deliverance. Oh, alright, enough of the effects for a minute. Perhaps after enough time browsing around on the internet or reading books on spirituality, you've heard of the miraculous in some way. Monks who are in such a state of awareness that they spend months meditating on a rock, uninterrupted, with no food or drink. Someone levitating, walking on water, psychic powers, etc. According to the Eastern mystics, psychic powers are fun and all, but they can be a bit of a distraction, and they are not the ultimate purpose of spirituality. It isn't to the advantage of the converted because it's still looking outward instead of inward. It is not to the advantage of the unconverted because they see it as just a magic trick, and that miracles are either just a coincidence or impossible. Quote, "Because they know nothing of spirituality and regard the material world and their hypotheses about it as supremely significant, rationalists are anxious to convince themselves and others that miracles do not happen and cannot happen. Because they have had experience of the spiritual life and its byproducts, the exponents of the perennial philosophy are convinced that miracles do happen, but regard them as things of little importance, and that mainly negative and anti-spiritual. The miracles which at present are in the greatest demand, and of which there is the steadiest supply, are those of psychic healing. In what circumstances and to what extent the power of psychic healing should be used has been clearly indicated in the Gospel. Whether it is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, "Thy sins be forgiven thee," or to say, "Arise, and take up thy bed and walk." If one can say "forgive sins," one can safely use the gift of healing. But the forgiving of sins is possible in its fullness only to those who speak with authority in virtue of being selfless channels of the Divine Spirit. Whether you believe in psychic healing or not, I'm sure that we can all admit that the world could always use a bit more compassion. We move on to idolatry. Quote, "To educated persons, the more primitive kinds of idolatry have ceased to be attractive. They find it easy to resist the temptation to believe that particular natural objects are gods, or that certain symbols and images are the very forms of divine entities, and as such must be worshipped and propitiated. True, such fetishistic superstition survives even today, but though it survives, it is not considered respectable. Like drinking and prostitution, the primitive forms of idolatry are tolerated, but not approved. Their place in the accredited hierarchy of values is among the lowest. In the past, our morality came from God and the institutions that claimed to speak for God. In today's society, truth is delivered to us through the educational system and the media. We've made progress on a material, technological basis. It would make sense given the material success that we have in our society. We would give credit to these institutions and give them the authority and respect they deserve. But one must wonder if we're so evolved in our modern secular society. Quote, how different is the case with developed and the more modern forms of idolatry? These have achieved not merely survival, but the highest degree of respectability. They are recommended by men of science as an up-to-date substitute for genuine religion, and by many professionals and religious teachers are equated with the worship of God. All this may be deplorable, but it is not in the least surprising. Our education disparages the more primitive forms of idolatry, but at the same time it disparages, or at the best, it ignores, the perennial philosophy and the practice of spirituality. In place of mumbo-jumbo at the bottom and of the immanent and transcendent Godhead at the top, it sets up, as objects of admiration, faith, and worship, a pantheon of strictly human ideas and ideals. In academic circles, and among those who have been subjected to higher education, there are a few fetishists and few devout contemplatives, but the enthusiastic devotees of some form of political or social idolatry are as common as blackberries. As in the fruit, not the phone that millennials used to use. Huxley gives three modern examples of idolatry: technological, political, and moral. So wholehearted is the modern faith in technological idols that, despite the lessons of mechanized warfare, it is impossible to discover the popular thinking of our time any trace of the ancient and profoundly realistic doctrine of hubris and inevitable nemesis. There is a very general belief that, where gadgets are concerned, we can get something for nothing, can enjoy all the advantages of an elaborate, top-heavy, and constantly advancing technology without having to pay for them by any compensating disadvantages. This is extremely relevant today, given the social media age. We're flooded with information, access to any movie, podcast, book, or cringy thing our friends are posting on Instagram. I remember in middle school when the internet was thought of as a platform that could give humanity a more global perspective, and that we could all learn and become more enlightened. Wasn't that adorable? We are just now seeing the addictive qualities of social media and the ramifications it will have for society, particularly on the generation ahead that won't even know what it's like to sit down and have a meal and actually interact with people without the fucking cell phone on. Decades ago, computers were able to beat the smartest chess players in our world, and our technology today is quantum leap ahead of that. The difference is that most people don't even know that they're being played by the algorithms now. This explains the phenomenon of echo chambers and all the other political horseshit that we see around us. Quote, only a little less ingenuous are the political idolaters. For the worship of redemptive gadgets, these have substituted the worship of redemptive social and economic organizations. Impose the right kind of organizations upon human beings, and all their problems from sin and unhappiness to nationalism and war will automatically disappear. Well, this certainly explains the BS of both political parties that we see today. The content of an ideology may be different, but at its core, they are remarkably similar. You suffer for X, Y, or Z, join my party so that way I can be in power, and all of your problems will magically disappear. I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but politics inevitably sinks down to the level of petty drama instead of concrete problem solving. Just look at any US election ever. Institutions become corrupted due to groupthink. See my video on groupthink. tribalism, and lack of systems thinking. Our systems are flawed because they are composed of humans, and humans are flawed, deeply. Lastly, on moral idolatry. Quote, "The moral idolaters are realists inasmuch as they see that gadgets and organizations are not enough to guarantee the triumph of virtue and the increase of happiness, and that the individuals who compose societies and use machines are the arbiters who finally determine whether there shall be decency in personal relationship, order or disorder in society. Material and organizational instrumentals are indispensable, and a good tool is preferable to a bad one. But in listless or malicious hands, the finest instrument is either useless or a means to evil." That pretty much sums up social justice warriors, doesn't it? We need morality in the sense of a code that we agree upon to live in a society. This could be a whole video in and of itself. A more spiritual view of morality is summed up by the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In other words, treat others how you want to be treated. However, the problem comes when morality is shoved so far down everybody's throats that we have a society of bland automatons where nobody speaks their mind about anything for risk of offending somebody else. So if technology, politics, and morality are not what give us the truth, then what does? Quote, "To distinguish the true grace from the false is often difficult. But as time and circumstances reveal the full extent of their consequences on the soul, discrimination becomes possible even to observers having no special gifts of insight. Where the grace is genuinely supernatural, and amelioration in one aspect of the total personality is not paid for by atrophy or deterioration elsewhere. The virtue which is accompanied and perfected by the love and knowledge of God is something quite different from the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, which, for Christ, was among the worst of moral evils. Hardness, fanaticism, uncharitableness, and spiritual pride. These are the ordinary byproducts of a course of stoical self-improvement by a means of personal effort, either unassisted or, if assisted, seconded only by the pseudo-graces which are given when the individual devotes himself to the achievement of an end, which is not his true end, when the goal is not God, but merely a magnified projection of his own favorite ideas or moral excellences. The idolatrous worship of ethical values in and for themselves defeats its own object, and defeats it not only because there is a lack of all-around development, but also and above all because even the highest forms of moral idolatry are God-eclipsing, and therefore guarantee the idolater against the enlightening and liberating knowledge of reality. Grace and virtue do not come from behaving in a certain way because that's what's expected of us, but instead taking others as ourselves. That's it for today's commentary. I am Parker Tebow of Focus Shift Media. If you have a topic or a book you think would be great to make a commentary or a montage out of, be sure to let us know in the comments. Feel free to head over to our website at www.focusshiftmedia.net, where our services are available, and to sign up for our newsletter for the latest uploads on our channel. Stay wise and stay groovy.